Welcome, everyone. Today we are talking with Dave McComb, CEO of Semantic Arts and a leading voice behind the Data-Centric movement. Dave's work has been foundational in helping organizations rethink how they structure and govern data to reduce complexity and integration debt. Dave, I'm hoping that you can tell me a little bit about your company, a little bit about yourself, and kind of where you hope to go in the next few years too.
Yeah, I suppose the place to start, most large enterprises have thousands of application systems. Some of them have tens of thousands. And just a rule of thumb as we go from company to company, I ask around, and this is usually not too far off. Most companies have an application for about every 10 employees. So
Okay.
if you have 10,000 employees, there's a pretty good chance you have 10,000 different application systems used to manage your business, and every one of them has a different data model. Every one of them calls everything different. Every one of them has different screens and forms and fields and with different names. And at some point, enterprises spend almost all their IT budget trying to stitch this thing back together.
That makes sense.
Yep. And it doesn't make sense in a way. It makes sense and it doesn't make sense. And my career, I spent about, exactly, I guess, 25 years building enterprise applications. I used to work for Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture and a .com and all that kind of stuff. And then I've spent the last 25 years trying to do something different, to give back, to fix the problem I was partly responsible for creating. And so the alternative, and how this becomes the way it is every time somebody goes to either build, buy, or these days rent with software as a service or AI, we're just going to construct them on the fly now. But every time we start with either the requirements or the workflow, we say, gee, what's the least amount of data I need to solve this problem and where am I going to get it from? That's just the mentality of developers. I was one, but that's what leads to this fractionated data landscape and hairballs and integration hairballs, all that kind of stuff. So the alternative is to say, look through the telescope from the other end. Whoa, actually, there is a model that represents most of the data you use to run your enterprise, and it's not very complicated. Once you know what that is, you can begin to start conforming your data to that model. And over time, it takes a while, you can gradually start weaning yourself away from this application-centric approach to things.
Do you mind if I ask you to elaborate a little bit more on when you say that there's a single data model, what do you mean by that? Just the type of data that they're processing and you're just able to integrate it into a single application, or can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, that whatever business you're in, let's say you're in the professional services business as we are. Right now, we have a dozen different applications. I have an accounting system and a CRM system and expense management and staff planning and applicant tracking. I have all those things. And they each have their own data model and they're all different. But really, there's a few dozen concepts that everything connects to. All we have is people, projects, clients, invoices, a few business transactions like that. And once you realize that's the core, and each one of these systems is just a different way of representing that same thing, you start realizing about it. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing right now, is collapsing all that data into one integrated model that's simple.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, you probably never looked very hard at, I point over this way because my QuickBooks machine is right over there. QuickBooks has 7,700 attributes.
Okay. It's a lot.
We're going to have a few hundred, and it's going to be far more powerful than QuickBooks. And that's only one piece of it, obviously. So all these systems have an amazing amount of unnecessary complexity, and the complexity is different. Obviously, QuickBooks didn't use the same terms or the same structure or anything as my CRM system or my expense management system or my procurement system or anything like that.
Okay. That makes sense. I will say, so I was doing a little bit of research into your company a little bit as well, and you have talked about, or you've written about the cost of application-centric architectures. When did you first realize the scale of the problem and what triggered you to move forward with this data-centric approach?
Yeah, it kind of crept up on me, I guess I would say. It was right around 1990. I just built 2 different ERP systems. I was pretty proud of myself. I thought that was pretty cool. But then I was just beginning to wonder why would 2 different developers design a different database for the same problem? And why is there no standards? Not only no standardization, nothing that causes people to converge on the same solution. And it seemed to me that was part of the problem. And this was back before the World Wide Web. So if you wanted to do research, you had to go to the library and get magazines, photocopies. Anyhow,
Okay. Yeah.
I read, and we somehow had this idea that maybe if we studied the science of meaning, what do things actually mean? That up to that point, database design was the study of structure. You figured out how your table structures were going to work and whether you had first normal or second normal or third normal, and all these little mechanical things you did to make your database more flexible. And it was all
Okay, yeah.
good. And it was all right. But they just kind of skipped over what does everything mean? It seemed to us maybe if you started there, things would converge. And at that point, I could only find 3 magazine articles that had been written about that idea. We devoured them. That was an afternoon's work, and just made up this methodology and took it to a couple of clients and did stuff. I mean, it was all made up. And then we got kind of rolled up into this .com roll up where we were building healthcare software, mostly for ambulatory healthcare, clinical trials, and various other things. And we built an architecture, and we looked at this semantic thing we were doing, and all of a sudden went, wait a minute, we could create a semantic model of an application, not of the domain of the application. Up to this point, let's create a model of the domain. Let's create a model of inventory or human resources or project management or whatever. But then we said, wait a minute, how about a model of what does it even mean to be an application?
Okay. Yeah.
And we built an architecture that could interpret that model, and you could just create use cases and therefore applications out of data. It was a very novel idea in the 90s. We got a patent, we had an architecture, we had systems that worked and clients that were paying us money, but not enough. We were at .com. We were in registration to go public in the spring of 2000. We were just getting ready for a road trip when the .com bubble burst, and we couldn't get access to any of that technology. The patents, the architecture, everything was in the smoldering wreckage of the firm. So we said, well, we better go consult. So we said, we're going to take what we learn and we're going to go consult. And that was 2000. As luck would have it, literally the next year, Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the World Wide Web, came out with what he called the semantic web.
Okay.
And we said, wow, everybody got rich on the World Wide Web. We're out ahead of the pack here on the semantic web thing. This is going to be great. And nothing. I mean, we went on for 5 or 10 years perfecting our craft, learning how to do these things. For most of that time, we were designers and not implementers.
Okay.
But finally, we realized, man, if for this to catch on, we're going to have to be a design build firm. So somewhere around 12 years ago, we started actually implementing these systems, designing and then implementing them. So it took a long time. We're slow learners. It took us a long time to figure this out, but it seems like it works now.
I'd say so. It seems like that you guys have been pretty successful. I was reading as well that, as you were talking about, especially as you've gone through your own process of growth and development. One of the things I found interesting too was just the fact, and kind of changing topic, is your incremental change, that you're not necessarily one to just be like, all right, let's turn down the chopping block. Today we're going to do it this way and tomorrow we're going to be brand new.
Yep.
Why have you decided to be more incremental?
Well, there's a visual here. This is a great little book. Okay, how big things get done. And in this we sort of stumbled on this incrementalism and didn't even have a name for it and didn't quite realize we were doing it until I read this book, and all of a sudden the light bulb went off. So he starts this book trying to figure out why mass transit projects always run way over budget. And he had a database of mass transit projects and funny stories and some ideas. But then he expanded his universe to include all kinds of capital projects. Now he's got a database with 30,000 capital projects and how they turned out and what happened. And sneak preview, there's a table near the back of the book where he lists from high to low the kinds of capital projects that run over budget the most and those that run over the least. And then there's an interesting conclusion in between. So if you're contemplating spending a lot of capital, the worst thing you can do is nuclear waste storage.
Okay.
The second worst thing you can do is host the Olympics. The third worst thing you can do is nuclear power generation. The fourth worst thing you can do is a hydroelectric power dam. And the fifth worst thing you can do is an IT project. And then you go all the way to the bottom of the list, airports and highways and bridges and all kinds of stuff. You get to the bottom of the list. What's the safest thing you can do? A wind farm or a solar array. Those run over budget like 1% on average. Wow, that's pretty wild. And then he goes on to say, why is that the case? It's because those ones at the bottom are modular in a different way than other projects are modular. The wind farm, once you stand up, if you've got a wind farm that's going to have 100 turbines in it, when you stand up 10 of them, you get 10% of the electricity.
Yep.
I mean, 20, you get 20. A nuclear power generation, when you spent 10% of the money, you don't generate any power at all. 20, 0. 50, 0. 100%, still 0 if you haven't finished. 200%, still 0. And once you've spent 150%, people say, oh, it's going to cost more. And, okay, I've got the sunk cost.
I got to make money.
Yep. And I've got all the sunk costs. I mean, it's the sunk cost fallacy that says, okay, I'll double down, put more money in. And they know that. So it turns out IT projects are much more like nuclear power generation than they are like solar farms. Most of them, especially legacy modernization, digital transformation, any of these big projects, they estimated, it's going to be $100 million and you get $100 million. Oh, this is harder than we thought. It's going to be another 50. And it is hard because it's connected into so many, what I was saying earlier, that one application doesn't live in isolation. It's got all these tentacles into all the other systems. You don't quite realize you can't rip the old one out until you've connected up all those other tentacles. And the new one has to do everything the old one did, plus more because you're paying more for some reason. What we sort of accidentally stumbled onto, and it seems to work better, is first design this simple model. We call that the think big part of our methodology. And then you reach into the existing system, take the data out and conform it to the simple model, and then prove that all of the data is in the new model. There's some queries you can run. If there was we did some work with Schneider Electric. They had 1 million different parts. As long as you got 1 million parts in the database and you can represent all the physical and electrical properties and all the standards and the prices and all the countries they're sold in. As long as you can prove that all of that is there and you haven't lost any fidelity, you've got a starting point and you can create a pipeline. You can keep that fresh now. It's like a data warehouse, but with much richer interaction and context. And then you can begin sort of stepwise instead of a big bang. It's two things you can do then. One is the existing legacy system was feeding some other systems. So now you say, okay, well, we'll feed it from the new system. And you can just move those over one at a time. You don't have to have a giant project to do that. And then you say, that existing system had, whatever it had, 100 different use cases. There was different things people were typing in and forms and all that kind of stuff. And you can just start bringing those over almost one at a time and say, okay, I used to do the order entry in this system, but since I've got all the customers and all the orders and all the products in this new system, I'll just do the order entry here. And you just quit doing it over there. So the pipeline no longer sends you the orders, but maybe it sends you something else that they're still doing, returns maybe. And you just do that incrementally, a little bit at a time, like a wind farm. Until pretty soon you say, well, that legacy system isn't doing much anymore. We just convert 10 more use cases and 2 more interfaces and turn it off.
Okay.
So it's kind of a safe way to do a big project.
Yeah. No, that makes, in my own experience of managing big projects, you're right. It seems like every single one always goes over budget. I think that might also be intentional in the sense of we want to get more money out of these people.
Yes.
So let's, let's see if we can, do some scope creep in there and make some more money, right? I think that's part of it. So have you found a lot of success then with this incremental plan? Have there been a lot of your customers been pretty satisfied with that?
The trick right now, we're mostly focused on pretty big enterprises. And with them, they've got so many applications, so many data sets that the progress is kind of incremental. It's positive and they like it. What I'm really trying to focus on now is I'm worried that the big customers will lose sight of the end goal because it's so far out.
Okay.
The question is, what does it look like when an enterprise is what we call completely data-centric? That means you don't have dozens or hundreds or thousands of applications. You just have one centralized knowledge graph, a data model, and you bring the application, the use cases to it, or the AI or whatever it is you're doing. You've got one grounded set of truth. And what does that look like when everything is totally integrated? So we thought, well, maybe we could get some mid-sized companies completely converted in a finite amount of time, like a couple of years still. Now we thought, in order to do that, we figured out there's probably 5 prerequisites to getting somebody completely converted in a couple of years. We had to already have the model pretty much complete before we started the project. Because right now we go in and sort of build the model while we're doing our project, because every client's a little bit different.
Yep.
Second thing is we need to have most of the use cases already implemented. If there's 200 or 300 use case, different things that a company does, you want to have most of those already in place before you go in. You want to have an environment where you can change those use cases easily without a lot of code. We've got that, but we'll go on. The fourth thing you want is to know most of their existing systems so you can figure out how to get the data out. The last thing you want to know is what are all the KPIs and what's important for that company. So if you take those 5 things together, it argues to go after a narrow vertical niche. So once you figure out a niche, those 5 things will be mostly the same as you go from place to place. And we decided to experiment on ourselves, because a lot of this still is experimental. And once we get it working for ourselves, we're going to find somebody else in professional services. And we just decided to pick on architects. So we're going to go after architects here next year or so, whenever we get this ready to go. Yeah, so that's where we're going. That's our secret plan to take over the world.
I like it. One of the big things that I'm really trying to push right now or work towards is AI. Artificial intelligence is obviously a very hot topic.
Yep.
How has AI impacted your line of business, your business processes, your implementation of AI? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, the first impact was it kind of flatlined our growth a bit. We were growing very nicely, and then about a year and a half ago or so, and I think what happened was AI got all the budget, and we didn't, right? But now it's picking back up again, because a lot of people's experience with their initial AI implementation was that their data wasn't ready for this AI project. There's a lot of people now who are talking about AI readiness.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
One of the best things you can do for AI readiness is have a single, simple, grounded version of the truth, which is what we do anyway. So that pretty much fits in. We are using AI right now kind of around the edges rather than right in the center. Well, I forgot to mention, one of the things we ended up having to do when we decided we would first tackle ourselves and then architects, is we had to solve accounting. I used to work for an accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, and I always thought accounting was sort of a solved problem. But once you get into it and you put your semantic goggles on and start staring at it harder and harder, which we have been doing for the last 2 years now, all of a sudden you realize that accounting will be vastly different in the future than it is now. Now, that sounds kind of weird, but I ended up getting together with a professor of accounting and writing a book. It's just done. It was supposed to be out in the middle of December, but my publisher yesterday just told me it's kicked into January, but coming soon. It's called The Future of Accounting. Yeah. So in our accounting system now, what we're doing is, if somebody has a receipt or something, or some Amazon emails you a tracking thing or something, we just send it to this AI, goes to 3 different AIs, and comes back and says, what is this? And comes back and votes on it. Well, 2 of them think it's a shipping notice, and one of them thinks it's I don't know what they think, something else. Anyhow, as long as we get at least 2 out of 3, and usually 3 out of 3 agreement on the price, the date, the what is it, the description of the product, and all that, we can then conform it to our ontology, our model, and just go straight into the system. So a lot of the stuff around the edges will be completely automated, mostly with AI now. We used to do this with NLP and other techniques, but AI is obviously more streamlined for that, and it's a little bit buzzword compatible, so that's always good. The other place, but I don't think we're getting as much traction on this, is, there's something now that's called GraphRAG. I don't know if you've come across that.
No,
RAG, retrieval augmented generation was the fad last year, and this year people have recognized that actually using a knowledge graph is a better organizing principle. Partly, I think it's just simpler schema and things like that, that these LLMs seem to be pretty able to consume data from a knowledge graph. And so this practice called GraphRAG has been evolving, and it's a murky concept at the moment. In fact, we're going to have a roundtable in the next couple of weeks, getting a bunch of people together, and at least let's see if we can come up with a common definition of even what GraphRAG is. Some people are using it to, you get a prompt from chat, dissect that, go into your graph and get context around the question. So that's like retrieval, augmented generation, and then return that to the AI, get a more thorough answer. But the other side is to use it more as guardrails to say when the AI generates an answer, dissect that and take it back to the graph and say, is that answer even viable or true or possible? So that whole ecosystem now is being called GraphRAG. But our main message is, if you want to do GraphRAG, you have to have a graph.
True.
Most people don't have a graph, so it's a good place to start.
That makes sense. A follow-up question. If someone was listening and is dealing with siloed systems and legacy complexity, what's a practical first step towards becoming more data-centric without taking on too much scope?
Yep. Well, I mean, the simple thing is read my second and third book. One of them is called Software Wasteland, and that describes in graphic detail how things got so screwed up and why they continue to be screwed up. It's meant to get people riled up and give it to your boss and say, we should quit doing this. Then the other book is called The Data-Centric Revolution, which is essentially what you should do instead of that.
Okay.
Kind of outlines how to go about this. So, in some ways, that's a place to start. We have a community where of like-minded people that come together. There's the Data-Centric Manifesto, which is datacentricmanifesto.org. That's just to kind of go sign and realize there's thousands of other people thinking the same way. And we have a community, and I'm going to forget, it's called datatransform.co. It's not com, it's just co. We couldn't get data transform. And it's, where people come together. There's seminars and roundtables and communication channel, various things to try and get a community going around this idea. And then if all else fails, call us, we'll help.
Well, I'll be sure that if I run across anyone, I'll be like, hey, go talk to Dave.
Yep.
Well, cool. Couple more questions. I'm looking ahead 3 to 5 years. What trends or signals suggest that the data-centric movement is gaining momentum?
I think it seems to me to be inevitable, but we'll see. I just think more and more people are I think it's a sort of a gradual switch over. It's sort of like, to me, it's like electric vehicles. You can see them, and if you have one, you realize they're obviously superior, but there's a lot of inertia to the old way of doing things. But you just look around and you say, yeah, it's pretty inevitable. The cost curves are different. The maintenance curves are different. The driving experience is different. Everything pretty much is better. So you just say, I think it's eventually going to go that way. And that's what I think is going to happen with data center. I think people are eventually going to see the different economics and the much lower risk profile and all that kind of stuff. And it will just one by one topple over. I'm hoping it will not be a big Gartner hype cycle thing, because what happens then, everybody rushes in. You got a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing, claim to know what they're doing. Then they launch a bunch of projects that don't go well. And then Gartner declares it's in the trough of disillusionment. And then it takes another 4 or 5 years to crawl out to the plateau of enlightenment to finally say, if we hadn't hyped it, we wouldn't have troughed it. And, but it might happen. I'm kind of happy if it doesn't happen, but either way, we'll get to the end.
Okay. Very cool. I did see in some of the comments that you've mentioned, you've been talking about how we started it, and I see that you're the co-founder. Looking on your website, I didn't see another co-founder. Did you have a partner that has since retired?
Yep, retired. Yep, I did. Yeah, so it's me now, although I use the we for the whole company. There's 32 of us now, I guess, or so. Okay. We are right in the final throes of becoming employee governed. Employee governed is this interesting place that I sort of made up that's in between employee owned and, traditionally owned, owner owned. I guess a traditional thing is owner owned. The problem, I think, with employee owned businesses, and was very exemplified. I live, mentioned you're in Colorado Springs. I live in Fort Collins. Obviously, you know where just that is. We had one of the poster children for employee ownership here, the New Belgium Brewery, Fat Tire.
Okay. Yeah.
That was employee owned, but I don't know, 4 or 5 years after the employees took it over, they sold it to Kirin, the Japanese beer people. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, if I were the original owners, I just said, I could have sold it to Kirin. Why should I give it to the employees and have them sell it to Kirin? That wasn't the point, really. Yeah, I get the idea of employees, self-governance, etc. So what we're doing instead is the company is going to be owned by the end of this year. So I've only got a few weeks left, but I think I got it. It's going to be owned by a trust and run by the employees, and they can do pretty much whatever they want except sell the company. They can't sell the company. So.
Okay. That'll remain with the trust owners.
Yep. And they can't sell it either. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So kind of an interesting arrangement, I think.
No, I like it. That's pretty clever. One last question for you. So obviously, I think you and I, and you with your additional experience, how wonderful technology can be. And I say that both realistically and sarcastically.
Right. Yep.
Sometimes I feel like I just want to throw my computer out the window, and sometimes I'm like, man, I love it that you're working. I guess one question that I have is, if you had a magic wand and could fix one thing that's holding your business back right now, just instantly remove a headache, what would that be?
Oh, I mean, it would mostly have to do with opening up my clients' books, but it's not. I don't think it's a technology problem. There was a while there that we were staying away from the incredibly high volume parts of an enterprise. So 10 years ago, big data was all the rage.
Oh yeah.
And it still is kind of. We mostly stuck with something I guess you could call large data. Millions or hundreds of millions or billions of things, but not trillions.
Okay.
But most companies at their core are only many thousand. I said earlier, there's hundreds of concepts, hundreds of classes. At their core, there's only tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of most of these individual instances. Like we were pitching an airline, we didn't get the work, but the airlines have huge volumes of transactions. But really, at their core, they have less than 1,000 airplanes, 20 or 30,000 pilots and flight attendants. And, you just do a little bit of math and you realize that's your core. Now, each plane, when it lands, there's another terabyte of data that, came out of all the sensors and stuff. Yeah. And you want to store that, but you want to not confuse yourself that you will only occasionally interrogate some part of that as it relates to, something that happened on that flight or whatever. And most of the time, you probably will never look at it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so for a while, we mostly stayed away from that very high volume stuff. But just last year, we also do a conference every year called the Data-Centric Architecture Forum. That one's dcaforum.com, where people come to Fort Collins. And this is mostly practitioners and implementers and the like. But this year, we had several people come with knowledge graphs with trillions of triples in them. And because knowledge graphs are federatable in a way that a lot of databases are not natively, now that starts to suggest, well, yeah, we will just have another knowledge graph or many of them with trillions of triples in them and just federate into them on an as needed basis. But most importantly, there's still just one model. The problem with big data is every data set has its own data model and you have to go study it and understand it and, start over again.
Yep.
Which I don't think is a great model. So anyhow, you were asking me what magic wand. I mean, the one wand I think has already been waved, which is take away some of the volume overhead that we were worried about. So that's not a good. That one we already waved that wand. Gosh, I don't think there is any magic wands. I think just open up your pocketbooks and bring us in. That's it.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, I think we're coming up on time.
Yep.
I really do appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you.
Yeah.
And learning a little bit more. Thanks for tuning in today. Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who'd benefit. My goal is simple: have real conversations with people doing meaningful work. If there's a potential guest I should talk to, send the note to the North Forge Intelligence LinkedIn page. I'll see you next time.